All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, baseball fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived at my train of thought. It's time to talk about the baseball season that was. All 2,430 games have been played, and we've hit the finish line. We know who's going to the postseason and who's not, and who's possibly going to Cancun. Some teams are worthy of Galveston, but that's neither here nor there. How did your team do? I'm going to do this the same way I did the All-Star Break edition of this. Both leagues, 3 words or less, and in the order of their finish. I'm going to start in the National League. And in truth, 5 teams separated themselves from everybody else. Everyone has a story, though. Let's start at the bottom here. Colorado, they finished 43-119, which leaves them 3 losses short. Let's see if there's something nice to say about the Rockies this year. Okay, well, Hunter Goodman had a very good season, and Mickey Moniak actually broke out and did something, which was good. Good stuff. Unfortunately, not much great otherwise happened here. Pitching was awful, and they were a true doormat in most cases. It's a shame because Coors Field was relatively full at times. Rockies fans showed up, and they also had one of the games of the year. Their 17-16 game on August 1st against Pittsburgh was an absolute classic. On that night, they allowed 9 of their runs in the first inning and 16 overall, obviously, in helping out the league's worst pitching staff. They gave up 1,021 runs as a whole, and yet they won that game. That's wild, ain't it? Washington, see you later. Salute to Bob Carpenter. I remember him mostly as a Cardinals announcer, obviously, especially during the years that Mark McGwire was ruling the roost, if you will, in St. Louis. But he's come over and made a name for himself, obviously, as a Nationals broadcaster. He's done an excellent job there. He's going to retire, so salute to him. I love what the Nationals did before the game, the tip of their caps to them, and all the videos that were sent to him. I love that. That was really cool. But in truth, for the future, there are some things worth building around here. Wood, Abrams, Lyle, Garcia, all are young, all can rake. They, as a team, unfortunately, this is one of their fatal flaws, are very bad at fielding. They are not a good fielding team. Their bullpen was also awful for the majority of the season. Jacob Young is electrifying. He's exempt from a lot of this, from the defensive part. He is very fun to watch. You saw that Mets game. Hopefully you saw those catches he made to basically steal a game from the Mets. He was amazing as a fielder and center fielder in general. He may also be a Mets villain for said game. Mackenzie Gore aside, this pitching was bad, and they gave up almost 900 runs. They gave up the second most runs in baseball behind the Rockies, what the Rockies did. Pittsburgh, 71-91 season. Poor Paul Skeens. Washington was 66-96, if I didn't mention that, by the way. This is the only one of the 30 teams, 3 words or less, that actually did not change. I still feel bad for Paul Skeens. He needs to get out of Pittsburgh ASAP. Skeens was excellent once again. He's going to win the Cy Young because the only other real competition to him was Zach Wheeler, and unfortunately he had the blood clot. And the Pirates scored 583 runs this year. They were the only team that played their home games at sea level and didn't get to 600. Colorado scored 597. This is peak Jacob deGrom levels of baseball crime, because that offense should be arrested, a lot of you. Except for maybe O'Neal Cruz, because O'Neal Cruz is fun to watch. It might be coaching, perhaps. It might be some of the players. But it's definitely the ownership. Y'all got to get right and actually spend some money to help Skeens and O'Neal Cruz to go do something in Pittsburgh before they go do something else for a real team. That would probably be good for the city of Pittsburgh. Atlanta, they finished 76-86. Sold souls. I'm convinced that they made a deal with the devil to win that 21 World Series without Ronald Acuna. And now they have 1 year before he makes close to Soto money in free agency, because we know he's going to. We know that it won't be Atlanta because they don't tend to pay that kind of bread. They do pay their guys early, but they pay them guys probably less than what market value could be had they waited a couple years. One of those guys that got a decent deal on was Michael Harris, and it's good to see that he actually played really well in the second half of the season. Matt Olson was very good. For examples on this, what offensive categories did he lead the Braves in? Yes, all of them. We move. The pitching was never around because none of them were healthy, unfortunately. They're really good, and they just weren't healthy. How do we know this? they didn't have enough innings to qualify for the ERA title. For example, and for reference, you need an inning a game, basically 162 innings to qualify for the ERA crown. Aside from Chris Sale, to be fair, none of them were that good anyway, even when they were healthy. St. Louis, 78-84 finish. Mid and Midwest, nothing really stood out here. Decent years from Brandon Donovan, Wilson Contreras, Alec Burleson, and not much else otherwise. Nothing else really blew away or was spectacular. Sonny Gray was dependable, but the ERA wasn't. Trading Ryan Helsley will likely work out long term because most Cardinals moves seem to. But in the short term, they were just mediocre. They just weren't spectacular. They were just overall kind of there, to be honest. Miami, 79-83, won World Series. Obviously not in the traditional sense. They're not playing in October. But they absolutely won their World Series this past weekend because they took this Mets series personally. They warned us that this was going to happen because they were still alive for the playoffs at Citizens Bank Park, and they chose not to pitch their best pitcher, Sandy Alcantara, at CBP. To be fair, the Phillies do well against him, but they chose not to throw their best at a situation where they were still alive, and they opted to pitch him to start the Mets series instead. He pitched relatively well. Legendary levels of pettiness throughout the weekend were by Marlins Twitter and by the Marlins broadcasters themselves. Legendary levels of pettiness. And the biggest shame of it all, what if Kyle Stowers were healthy? If he were, they might have made the playoffs. They've got some promise here. They've got some good young talent. They had a lot of rookies play this year. They played the most in baseball, their rookie class did. And Stowers was the anchor of that offense, carrying a lot of the power. With that pitching staff, they've got something. Get healthy, get right. You might be playing in October next year. Arizona, they finished 88-82. Sold too soon? It's a real shame for the Diamondbacks because they lost Corbin Burns to TJS. That was their big splash pitching move. And then they flipped their best power hitter in Eugenio Suarez to Seattle when things were looking rough. And then they got super high, like their weather, because Corbin Carroll and Ketel Marte led the charge as the youth movement continued to move. Great season by Geraldo Perdomo. He was really good this year. But I guess the question will be about this Diamondbacks team will be this. What if they didn't make any moves? What if they stayed pat and were allowed to because of the help of Corbin Burns, allowing that rotation to round out the way they envisioned? What if they kept Suarez and Josh Naylor? Are they heading to LA instead of the Reds? I'll get to Cincinnati obviously later. The Giants, 500, frustratingly mid. Let's face it, we all thought they won the Rafi Devers trade. And there is some good news on this front though. Willie Adames hit 30 bombs. This is important because he's the first guy since God mowed Bonds to do this. Rafi Devers also hit 30-plus bombs between his two stops, and he'll probably do this next year as well. So at least there's a little bit more power in this lineup. Yet somehow his play and that of the team kind of just leveled off. They had opportunity after opportunity to take over the wild card spot and get in as a 6th seed. They got super hot in August after the trade deadline, after they sold Tyler Rogers to the Mets. And yet they couldn't. They found a way not to. They just sold at the deadline because their offense before said deadline was cratering. And now they got it together in various ways, which is kind of impressive in a way. It's just a shame that they couldn't get it together long enough to make a run in the playoffs. New York Mets, they were 83-79, and the most expensive failure. MasterCard used to tell us all the time that there are certain things that money can't buy. For Steve Cohen, it was a world title this year. June 13th, 2025 will live in infamy for this team. On that day, they had the best record in baseball. They went 38-55 since, en route to missing the playoffs. They never won when trailing after 8. They were 0-70. And no team self-destructed like this one, whether it be the offense, so not coming up with the big hits, whether it be the pitching, as in staff or relievers, not named Edwin Diaz, who just couldn't get it together in time. Whether it be the defense, which picked hilarious times to crater. There will be Low-Mets videos, and they'll be legendary. I'm waiting for them on social media. And the injury to the pitching staff, sure. Obviously that happened. The Senga injury, he was never right. The injuries to the staff, but from McGill with the TJS, it's a lot of McGill with the injuries, a lot of TJS stuff. One of them tore their Achilles. It was a bad year to be a Mets pitcher. They used 40 of them, mostly baseball. And their bullpen, the moves that they made, Tyler Rogers was fine. Gregory Soto was okay, I guess, even though it started bad. Ryan Helsley, yikes. He might have cost himself some M's in free agency. That was not good at all. But it was just, they went after the wrong things. They needed an ace starter. They went after bullpen relief. They needed bullpen relief, sure, but they didn't get the ace that they needed. And that was really a major, major mistake. It's a shame because a lot of this wasted Edwin Diaz and the Flushing Four having very big seasons. But Pete Alonso's already got a foot out of the door, and Edwin Diaz could also opt out and become a free agent after big paydays in New York. Will either of them be back? Does the fan base want these guys back? Nolan McClain looked spectacular at points. I was at the best performance of his career, 8 strong against the Phillies, where they finished off their sweep and effectively won their World Series, ironically. I would know because that's how a lot of those people reacted. Do not lie to me if you find this video and say you didn't. But I think the question is simple. He and the new kids on the bump, him, Tong, and Sproat, couldn't save them this time because maybe they came up too late. Is this their foundation for the pitching staff going forward? It probably should be. How fast will they firmly become said foundation? David Peterson had a very good year. It just felt like he ran out of gas. Sean Manaea was never right, obviously, and the rest of that pitching staff is very questionable. So I guess they need new kids on the bump to really establish themselves ASAP. Otherwise, this 7-train wreck is going to continue into next year. Cincinnati. They also finished 83-79 and beat the Mets off tiebreaker. I'm just saying, how? This team annoys me. It really did. They could obviously pitch. Yeah, there's no questioning Lodolo and Hunter Green and company. That pitching staff is nasty. They carved up a lot of people. This offense is way too inconsistent, though. Aside from Elly De La Cruz, he's spectacular. But a lot of this offense is inconsistent. They had a big series, and then they followed it with a disaster one. Look at their September, for instance. I thought they were done after the A's absolutely bullied them in Sacramento. And then they went 6-1 against the Cubs and Cardinals, sweeping the Cubs. Right after that, they lose 2 out of 3 against Pittsburgh for some reason, and then they were a robbed home run away from possibly getting swept by the Pirates. Then they beat the Brewers 2 out of 3, and again, Milwaukee kind of took it like, whatever, cool, they're fine. But Milwaukee played their guys, and they won 2 out of 3 anyway against the Brewers. And then they found their way in because the Mets self-destructed as well, sure. Can the bats keep up with the pitching? If their pitching is good, they've got a real shot in LA. San Diego, they went 90-72. Very steady team. AJ Prella's relentless pursuit of a title led him to dropping a nuke on the farm system. It led to Mason Miller and Ryan O'Neal and Roman Liriano, and the latter two from Baltimore. The pitching was decent enough as well, I will say. And I do worry that the pen was a bit taxed because the pitching didn't get enough innings, similar to the Mets, but the pen's better. I do wonder about the bats being a mix of clutch and not somehow overly powerful. Only Machado and Tatis hit 20-plus homers. They did have a lot of depth in the lineup, but somehow the power didn't come in abundance like you've kind of seen in Padre years past. Even with these concerns, unlike 2022 when it didn't have Tatis, they've got Tatis now. Is this their best shot of the ring? Chicago, 92-70. So the series will be starting in Chicago between the Padres and Cubs. Offense getting colder. Their offense has plenty of bats, and they aren't hitting the same down the stretch, though. Some of this is Kyle Tucker struggling, but the offense isn't quite hitting at the same efficiency that they hit at the first half of the year. Michael Busch is hitting okay, and PCA is hitting okay, but the offense isn't hitting like you expect it to. They'll have their explosions, but then they'll go cold, and I wonder if that's indicative of what's coming this series against the Padres. I was pretty much always concerned about the pitching depth, though. Matthew Boyd aside, I should say, can they get enough from the staff? And I don't love the bullpen very much either. Not having Horton would be critical against the Padres. LA Dodgers, they went 93-69. Season starts tomorrow. We get it. We knew the Padres would be here defending their title. But I think we were all expecting a 150-120 win team. They had their moments this season where the team just couldn't baseball. Not defensively, not in terms of fielding, but in terms of the hitting and the pitching. It just wasn't there at points this year, which is wild. If there's a fly in the ointment to me about the Dodgers, it's their bullpen. It gets kind of beaten up when they get used and overused, if you will. Sure, they're going to have reinforcements go to the pen like Clayton Kershaw, but the pen just kind of gets worked at different points. The Phillies absolutely destroyed them 2 weeks ago. when they won 2 out of 3 out in LA. And I do wonder if the staff struggles, the starting staff struggles in this series against the Reds in terms of their patience. Can the Reds be patient enough to get them out of the game early enough to get to the bullpen? Because at which point I think I trust Cincinnati a little bit more in that regard than the Dodgers. Maybe because of said pen. So we'll see how that goes. This offense is obviously awesome with Ohtani, Betts, Freeman, the Hernandezes and company, Paez, all of them. Awesome offense. But can the pitching be stable enough to carry them back over the finish line? Philadelphia went 96-66. Red October resumes. The best home team in baseball has gotten home field against almost everybody else. They also have the batting champion in Trey Turner. They have the home run and RBI champion in Kyle Schwarber, at least in the National League. And when the offense gets home run happy, there is a fly in the ointment here, they do get cold. But when they're patient and they are good selective-wise with their pitching, i.e. Harrison Bader, who's been a revelation since he came over from Minnesota, the offense can get absolutely dangerous, and they can put up cricket numbers real quick. Sure, other than Schwarber and Harper, the home runs were not there for this Phillies team. But it didn't really need to be when everybody else was basically hitting at different points. There were times when JT Realmuto was hitting. There were times when Alec Bohm was hitting. There were times when Brandon Marsh was hitting. So the 5-hole spot's been kind of a platoon. I think it's best off being Alec Bohm, but I do wonder how the lineup will look in general now that Harrison Bader and Trey Turner are fully healthy and Bader's been raking. Do you dare move everybody down one and slot Bader as the second hole hitter so then you can get the big boys up in Schwarber and Harper? Or do you maybe even bat Bader leadoff and then go Turner second and then go Schwarber, Harper and keep it moving from there? I do wonder how that's going to look from Rob Thompson. This pitching staff has been generally awesome. Their starters have really allowed the pen to not be overly taxed, which is obviously going to come up big next week. The pen, middle relief-wise, can get a little spotty. It should be a little bit better that Aaron Nola and Taijuan Walker are going to be in it for the most part, Walker Buehler as well. But the bullpen middle relief has been a little spotty, though. I do want to see if that can improve for the Phillies. Johan Duran, however, has been really good and has been mostly rock solid. A couple runs here and there, but all closers will allow that. He's been generally rock solid for the majority of his time as a Philly. It feels like this is their last chance before the core has some real questions to answer. Can they answer them with another parade down Broad Street? But the one team the Phillies will not have home field advantage against in either league was the one team that finished the game ahead of them, that being the Brewers. They were 97-65, stable and reliable. They felt like one of those classic basic cars you see on the road, like a Toyota Prius or Honda Accord. Are they perfect? No, but they are very dangerous when it comes to their speed and their contact hitting. Jackson Chourio especially. Their pitching is generally good, especially with Freddie Peralta being very awesome, and Trevor McGrill coming back is going to be huge as the closer, holding it down in the back end. It's great to see Christian Yelich coming back to top-tier status because he's been kind of off and on for that last few years. He's back to it, relatively speaking, now. Very good to see that. Milwaukee kind of sort of coasted to the finish line over the last week or so. They kind of struggled for the last few weeks. But they did get it together just enough to get to the 1 seed as the Phillies couldn't take it from them. Is it Milwaukee's time to finally break through and get to a World Series? They've had some heartbreaking ends to their seasons in years past. Is this another one? Let's get to the American League before I predict these playoff series and how this is going to go down. It features possibly the end of an era and one of the greatest choke jobs of all time that was narrowly avoided. Let's talk about it. Chicago White Sox will lead off. They were 60-102. Bad, but better. They aren't last year, or all-time awful, which is an improvement. Nowhere near contender status, but they aren't historically bad. Shane Smith was at least decent, and considering how they struggled on the mound, they're in a better place for this. Could they have an emerging cornerstone in Lenyn Sosa, who had a very promising rookie year and is on the board for Rookie of the Year stuff? Chicago has a ways to go, at least the White Sox do, but improving by 19 games is a fresh start. Minnesota went 70-92, starting over. There's not much else to really say here for the Twins. They dropped a nuke on their franchise. We all know this. They still don't spend money in their ownership, and they didn't sell their team. We know this. There is Byron Buxton, though, who really played well, and he finally stayed relatively healthy by his standards. I'm still stunned he's a Minnesota Twin, by the way. Cody Clemens actually played relatively well. This is his first real season as a true starter, for the most part. Again, I'm concerned about this ownership and who it will be and how much they'll actually spend to try to keep Minnesota afloat as they kind of continue living off TV deals and various things. I just don't know where Minnesota is truly going to go from here. It just doesn't seem to be much great to happen so far. LA Angels are 72 and 90. So the fact that the Twins only finished 2 games worse than them is really stunning. Free Mike Trout. They finished last in the AL West, and that was not on my bingo card. Neither was Joe Adell, coming close to a 40 home run season, finishing top 10 in said regard. Taylor Ward hitting 35. That works. That checks out. But the problem is that this pitching is awful, and they weren't going to go anywhere anyway, even with all the hitting, and Mike Trout staying pretty healthy now. They simply aren't anywhere close, and they won't be until Artie Moreno does what's needed to be done, just spending money on quality pitching. They gave up the most runs in the American League with 837. That's saying something. That's also third overall in baseball. The Rockies and Nationals being the worst at stopping people from scoring. Baltimore finished 75 and 87. A complete disaster. What happened to this offense? They were dominant for 2 or 3 years, and sure, I get it. The injuries were crazy, especially to the catching spot, but the drop-off is absolutely insane. Gunnar Henderson aside, this offense took a massive step back. Jackson Holliday was also okay, so maybe he should be exempt. But what do you do with Adley Rutschman? They already have their catcher of the future ready to go, and I guess the question is, will they trade him, and what will they get for him if they do? I get that the pitching was also bad, but I didn't love the staff to start with after Corbin Burns was let go and he basically went to Arizona before the TJS stuff. Felix Bautista is a really good closer, but I feel like he's wasting away in Baltimore. Unless Baltimore can get back to contention status ASAP. Sacramento, and I will call them Sacramento because that city deserves to be named that for holding it down for the A's. They finished 76 and 86 this year. They also have a legit offense. I see why they kept Burroker now. They have serious bats surrounding him and a ballpark, for now, that caters to them. I'll be kind of surprised if Nick Kurtz isn't high on Rookie of the Year ballots, if not winning said Rookie of the Year. Bombs were also hit by Shea Langoliers, Tyler Soderstrom, and Lawrence Butler especially. They also get a serious haul from Mason Miller, thanks Padres, and it did what Baltimore couldn't do, was trading an elite closer to get that haul. It's too bad that the pitching also gave up a bunch of runs. Only 4 teams gave up 800 of them. Sacramento was the one that gave up the least of those 4 at 817. I do wonder if the Vegas ballpark is going to be good at being a hitter's park like Sacramento's ballpark is. That crowd showed out too, by the way. Tampa Bay, they went 77 and 85. Needs a home. I guess being back in the Trop is good, because at least it's their home and not the Yankees. It's also good that they have another star, Junior Caminero, who had a spectacular season. Brandon Lowe hitting 31 bombs is also impressive. 31 for 31. Good stuff. And Yandy Diaz had a very good year as well. 300 hitter. Quality stuff. It's good pieces to build around. The starting pitching was not awful. It just wasn't great. And it might have been part of the reason why they missed the playoffs. The other part of it being they were in the best division in baseball. That's not going to help your cause either. Texas, 500, 81 and 81. Back to mediocrity, which is where they've kind of swam for their entire history. Okay, the 23 title was a fluke. Say that 3 times fast. Their bats, instead of being elite like they were in 2023, they were back to being kind of sort of mid. How this offense regressed this fast and that easily is kind of baffling. Maybe part of that's because Corey Seager only missed a third of the season due to injury, and that will probably do some of that. He is their table setter. The pitching staff, outstanding. Best overall in the game in terms of ERA, in terms of allowing runs. And it's a shame that they won't be pitching in October. Nathan Eovaldi had the best year of his career. Jacob deGrom was back to being Jacob deGrom. Not quite peak, but probably on an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. And Patrick Corbin wasn't completely trash, where he was the worst pitcher in baseball for a few years in Washington. And was really good at points. What do you do now for Texas? How do you rebuild and get this offense back to what it was a few years ago? Something I need to know. Kansas City, 82 and 80. Not enough offense, speaking of which. Vinny Pasquantino, Bobby Witt, Salvador Perez. They hit 30, 32, 30, and 23 home runs, respectively. No one else hit more than 16. They scored the 3rd most runs, and that's actually Salvador Perez who hit the 30 and Bobby Witt who hit the 23, but you get the idea. They scored the 3rd most runs in their division. Unfortunately, this is not a flex. They only scored 651 of them, which ranks 13 in the AL. Yikes. The White Sox I mentioned, they scored the least. They scored the second least. Believe it or not, there's a team I didn't mention yet that scored less. Their pitching, however, was really good at preventing said runs, and they actually outscored their opponents, 651 to 637. Very impressive by the pitching staff. It's just a shame it got wasted because aside from the three I mentioned offensively, the offense just wasn't offensive. Houston, 87 wins and 75 losses. Too many injuries. Why they aren't playing tomorrow was obvious. The injury bug came calling for them. Well, that not replacing Kyle Tucker. That's on y'all. Almost not having Yordan Alvarez at all for this season was a devastating blow. Jeremy Pena missed some time, obviously. Josh Hader missing a bunch of time was also devastating. The Seattle series is basically a mercy killing, and the Mariners battered them for most of 3 games, especially the last one. It's a shame because the pitching was excellent. Framber Valdez is about to get paid big time in free agency, and if he leaves, Hunter Brown looks like a starting one, SP1, at the very least. Detroit, same record as Houston, but better tiebreakers. The trade deadline. If the Tigers go out this week, July 31st will be when it started. They didn't go for the kill when they had the chance. There's no way anyone saw this coming, obviously, and yet we probably should have because their offense just wasn't productive enough. And honestly, after Skubal, the pitching staff, it's okay, I guess you could say. It went into an 08 auto industry like funk when Skubal carried the staff. It's wild that Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson and company couldn't hold it together, though. It's a little disappointing, even without the trades. And it's a shame because Javi Baez and Gleyber Torres both had really good seasons. Baez was an all-star center fielder. That's not something that you would expect to say a few years ago. At least you're not one of Baez's former teams in the Mets. Cleveland with 88-74. Major League Remix. How with the worst offense and trading Shane Bieber and watching Emmanuel Clase go Pete Rose blows, and I don't mean with the hitting, and a 15.5 game hole in the AL Central on July 9th, did they possibly hunt the Tigers down with a week to go? Well, 5 days to go, technically. Sure, Jose Ramirez is the lead, and he's like that. And the depth isn't individually awful. I like Fry, and I like Noel, and I like Kwan. They're good hitters, those 4. But the depth after them, they just don't score runs. Their pitching staff is excellent, sure, but it just shouldn't be this. Except for this one particular part. When they played the Tigers on Tuesday, it felt like death of 1,000 paper cuts, where Turk Skubal tried his hardest to keep his offense and the Tigers afloat, yet the Guardians just kept hitting infield hits and infield hits and infield hits. They scored 3 runs, and none of them left the infield except for a throwing error. And that's how they won that game. Maybe they're the only team in the playoffs that is capable of doing such a thing. Can the power display actually show up if there is one? Boston, 89-73. Rebuilt after Rafi. Once upon a time, there was a good shortstop in Colorado. He eventually made his way to Boston and got paid a large sum of money. During a lot of this time, he and they were mocked for this contract because he couldn't stay healthy or produce. Then this season happened, and Trevor's story changed. He went back to Rockies flows, and he became the catalyst to the Red Sox rising from the dead, and all the trolling that we did after the Rafi Devers deal. We all did trolling, let's admit it. Alex Bregman and Jalen Duran also had very good compliments to at the plate, while Garrett Crochet wasn't advertised on the bump. Aroldis Chapman in the pen also worked out really well. And I'm ready for the showdown against the greatest op. Is this the end of the season? Seattle went 90-72. Best since 2001. Not record-wise, but this is their best team since 01, I would say. The pitching staff isn't as advertised, but it somehow doesn't need to be. This offense, however, has been mostly destructive since the deadline. Cal Riley's been incredible, and it's been talked about a lot. But there's also Julio Rodriguez, who's been incredible. Gino Suarez has been incredible. Rainier Rosarena has been a really good table setter. And Josh Naylor, who's held it down as kind of the anchor to this 5-man offensive armada that they've built, that they've set towards teams. Also, J.P. Crawford kind of being the table setter at the end of the lineup also helps. Since the deadline, truthfully, the only team that really locked them down in terms of offensive production was the Phillies. They swept them, and they kind of really kept the Seattle power display to a minimum. Otherwise, they've matched their way to the West title. The stage has been way too bright for this Mariners team in years past. Are they ready now? New York Yankees, 94-68. Have you learned? Last year, this team made the World Series based almost completely off their offense and Garrett Cole. This year, the former's true, but without Cole, it's been Max Fried holding it down as the anchor, as the ace of this rotation. Instead of Soto, it's Trent Grisham, Chad Chisholm, and Ben Rice. Truly rounding out the lineup. Some contributions by Paul Goldschmidt, too. Also, Aaron Judge is continuing to be a superhuman. That doesn't hurt. The obvious signs of destruction are all still here. Aaron Boone's bad managing, to the defense, to the lack of fundamentals, to the shaky bullpen. Looking at you, Devin Williams. It begs the question, have you learned? And Toronto, the only Canadian team, they're going to go last. And it's by design because they have the best record in the AL at 94-68. Pretty refreshing. Honestly, I'm happy for them. A couple of years ago, they had a truly frustrating out to the playoffs as the Twins locked them down for 2 games. And for years, they've horribly underachieved with this core of Bichette and Vlad Guerrero Jr. No, we didn't forget about what happened against Seattle. We just didn't want to talk about it. Now, with minimal expectations, they're figuring it out. Vlad Jr. obviously leads the headlines, but George Springer and Bo Bichette have more than held up their ends of the bargain. The latter coming back will be huge for this playoff run. Can Gausman and Bassett and Barrios do their part in stabilizing the rotation and the pitching staff? Because if they can, it lets the bullpen not have to do anywhere near as much as they need to. And I think that would be very beneficial for a Toronto team that can mash and has a really good home field advantage at Skydome. I will always call it Skydome. So there we are. That's all 30 teams. That's 2,430 games. And now we can talk about the playoffs. And we can finally get to the point of if the season ended today, we can finally talk about it and say it's actually over. Let's get to the playoff bracket and how I see it going down. First, we got the wild card rounds, and I love the American League ones basically being fights to the death in their respective divisions. Well, somewhat. Tigers, Guardians, in a best of 3. I'm going to go with the Guardians winning 2 out of 3. I think they will lose the Scooble game. I think they will win the other 2. So give me Guardians winning 2 out of 3, defending their land. Red Sox, Yankees, I'm going to go with the Red Sox winning 2 out of 3. I do think Boston will lose tomorrow's start, Crochet versus Fried, but I do think Boston will win the other 2 and figure it out. I just trust their bullpen a little bit more than the Yankees, and especially Chapman. We'll go with the Red Sox winning 2 out of 3 at Yankee Stadium. Now to the National League, I will go with the Padres winning 2 out of 3 against the Cubs. I trust their pitching staff a little bit more than Chicago's. And I will go with the Dodgers sweeping the Reds 2-0. I just don't think the Reds have enough offense. So give me the Dodgers winning that series 2-0. So that sets up, because they don't reseed for some reason, the Phillies playing the Dodgers in a best of 5. I will go Phillies in 4. I think the Phillies will win both games at CBP and then snatch game 4 at Dodger Stadium. So give me Phillies in 4 as we finally get the rematch we've waited 4 years for, to be honest, just a round too early. I'm going to go with Padres and Brewers, obviously, in the other half of the NLDS. And I'm going to go with the upset here. Give me Padres in 5 to win that series. I think their offense will do a little bit, just enough, to get by Milwaukee and get to the finish line in that series and bring a disheartening end to what was a spectacular season for the Brewers. NLCS, Phillies-Padres, once again. This time it's the Phillies that have home field advantage, but this time the results do not change. I will go with the Phillies in 6 games to win the NL pennant, and I think overall the Phillies are a slightly better team. I trust their offense a little bit more, and although the Padres are going to want revenge, please do not do that song ever again, but I think the Phillies are going to win that series in 6 games. So I think the Phillies will win the NL pennant for the second time in 4 years. Now let's go to the American League. As I mentioned before, I have Seattle facing Cleveland. I will go with the Mariners in 4 games. I think their offense is just too much, and their pitching, though not better than Cleveland's, isn't awful. Give me the Mariners in 4. Blue Jays, Red Sox, and the other side of this. I'm going to go with, this is a tough one, but I'm going to say Toronto in 5 games. I think this is going to be a really good series. And I think that Toronto overall slightly better than Boston. It's a really hard one. This is probably the hardest series for me to predict amongst them. I will go with Toronto winning in a really good 5-game series. ALCS, that leaves Seattle, that leaves Toronto. 2 really good home field advantages, 2 really good spots across the countries. I'm going to go with the American team. Give me the Mariners in 7 games. I think it'll be a tremendous series. So finally, the Seattle Mariners make it to the World Series? No, I'm just looking around. There's no lightning. There's no bolts of lightning. There's no earthquakes. No natural disasters in this area. Thank goodness. Pray for those who are maybe dealing for the 2 hurricanes that may be coming to shore later this week. But I'm going to go with Seattle and the Phillies in the World Series. And overall, I think it'll be a little similar to what happened a couple of weeks ago where the Phillies dominated Seattle's offense. I think it'll be a little bit more of the same. And this is without Zach Wheeler when they did this, by the way. I think it'll be similar to that here, but not in Seattle. I do think Seattle will get a couple games out there, but ultimately the Phillies win in 6. Give me the Phillies winning in 6 games against the Seattle Mariners to win the World Series in 2025. So there you have it. Those are my playoff predictions. I will post them below. If there's MLB's doing something about that, I will post them and share them. You can get a link to all that. So there you have it. That's how I have this. That's how I see it. Coming up tomorrow on this channel, however, will be the Railway recap for Week 4 of the NFL season. Obviously, you got 2 games tonight to talk about. And, of course, that tie that happened last night. Yeah, that was a wild, weird game. Anyway, I'm going to talk about all that. And we know because of the first game that happened last week, it also involved the Seattle team. Seattle versus Arizona. You'll be the first stop of my next train of thought.